I would think you would be very much forgiven if you thought those readings were a little confusing, especially the first one. Did that not sound like Abraham and God were negotiating like they were buying a used car? You know, if you know the context of the story, God has decided he is going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. You may not know this fact, but Abraham's nephew, a guy named Lot lives in Sodom. And so that's probably why Abraham goes through this. But, how about 50? There's 50 good people, you won't do it? You won't destroy the cities? And God says yes, and he works them down to 10. Negotiates. Do you and I get to do that? I mean, in other words, is that the point of the story? Is that story supposed to tell us, oh, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that's what you should do. You should negotiate with God. Something's not going on the way you want it. You should try to get God to change his mind. I mean, certainly the gospel story has got a flavor of that. This little story that Jesus tells, guy needs to borrow some food so he can provide for a visitor. And Jesus says the guy's going to get what he wants just out of persistence. Just keep pounding on the door. I don't know if you would know this expression. I grew up with it. Storm the gates of heaven. It was used somewhat sparingly, but when there were important matters, someone in the church was sick, kind of a grave illness, if you will, or something else that was pretty big in the life of the church. We were all encouraged. The idea was to get everybody in the church to pray for this one thing. And the imagery was, we are going to storm the gates of heaven, which I never quite got, even as a kid, because it sure sounded like God's not doing what we want, and so we're gonna raise up an army and go make God change his mind. It didn't quite seem right to me. What are you going to do with all this? Well, I must confess to you that I have raised more questions than I can answer in the time I've got, but I can get you started in a really, really good way. You need to go back to this first story and remind yourself of, somebody not Abraham, somebody lived in Abraham's time. What's his God look like? Gods in Abraham's day, they were localized. They only operated in a given area, given country, say, given region. They were clearly, they were made, some statue, pole, something like that. But when it came down to the theology of it, or the relationship between God and humans, there was nothing like you and I would expect. It was very much a one-sided deal. God got to do whatever he wanted. And you, as the believer, the supplicant, whatever, you just had to put up with all this. And you never actually knew if what you were doing was right. So if, say, you prayed for crops and you brought sacrifices to get a good crop, well, if the crop turned out really well, there's always a part in the back of your mind. It was like, well, should I just do the same thing again next year? Because, I did this, the crop turned out well. Or because the crop turned out well, do I owe God more? And so maybe you do a little more just in case. And of course, if the crops turned out badly, you just had to come to the conclusion that somehow you were not in favor with God. And so you had to do something really big. Like take one of your kids and sacrifice them to the God, because you had to do something. But there was no communication, or to put it differently, there was no relationship. But notice what is going on with Abraham here. The theology of this, you can tell the theology is early, because there's that, at the beginning it says, God hears the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then he says, I have to go down to see if it's true. Well, I mean, we know that's ridiculous. God is everywhere. God didn't have to go down. But that's the way the writer of that day would have pictured a God. It's probably how Abraham pictured the God. But what's remarkable about this picture is that Abraham's God cares. I mean, like, he really cares. He's concerned, right before this starts, he's concerned whether he even should tell Abraham, because he knows it's a tough subject for him. And so God is worried, should I tell Abraham? And then he does, and then God is just crazy patient. All of the other gods of the lands, they wouldn't have even asked. They just would have we'll just destroy that city. They might have destroyed it even if there were good people in it. Who cares? They would just do what they wanted to do. Not Abraham's God. Abraham's God loves him, cares about him. I just wonder if that is the beginning of all our answers to prayer. Because this whole study, this whole thinking about how do I pray and how does it work and why do these prayers get answered and these not, and what does it mean for God to for ask and it doesn't always seem to happen the way I want it. What do you do there? Well, I think you just start by reminding yourself, God cares, God loves. And I got a chance this week to see a tangible example of that. So if you didn't know, I spent the week at Covecrest Life Teen Youth Camp, and I believe this is I think it was just Friday. I happened to be in the in the dining hall, and I happened to glance over, and there was Steve. Steve is this older adult. He was the main speaker for the camp. Terrific guy. But Steve is sitting in a chair, and it's hard for me to demonstrate for you, but he is leaning forward, and there's this girl there that is talking to him. And he is leaning forward, and he's not saying a word. I watched him for a good 2 minutes. He didn't say anything. And she just kept looking at him, and she just kept talking. I found out that Steve had been doing that all week. He would just engage different teens in conversations, just get them to talk, ask them a question or two, get them to talk. And he wasn't interested in giving them advice, wasn't interested, really knew he couldn't fix their problems. Most of their problems were home. But he could listen. He could sit there and really listen and convey to those kids, I care about you. I really, really care about you. I just wonder if maybe that's a great place to start. And sometimes, maybe in our prayer life, that's a place to end too. I will go to the Lord and I'll just tell him what's going on. And I'll just know that he's going to sit there like that adult leader did and just lean in and just stare right at you and say, yeah, tell me. God loves us. That's the point of that story.